So, hi everyone. Hi. My name is Brian Villa, and I am the Community Health Program Manager at the RYSE Youth Center. And today I'll be talking about some of our radical inquiry work, including our listening campaign. Unfortunately, my co-presenter, Laylee, is unable to be here today because she's sick. Laylee was our public health intern when she was in high school. She now goes to UC Berkeley studying psychology. And I'll be going over her youth participatory action research project on coping strategies for young people of color. And so to kind of give a little context of the RYSE Center, RYSE was born out of youth organizing in the year 2000. There was a lot of violence happening in the community, and young people really came together and advocated for a space that they can call their own and receive various service. One of the top priorities they identified was mental health services. And so RYSE officially opened its door in 2008, so that was 8 years of organizing. And 4 years after we opened, we conducted a listening campaign, which we used to kind of go back into the community and really listen to young people and see whether what we were doing it was still relevant to their experiences and responsive to the needs that they said they needed, right? And so here at RYSE, we really view listening as a key component to healing and transformation. So some of the goals for our listening campaign was to understand the lived experience of Richmond youth burdened with multiple forms of violence and trauma. And so we really just wanted to sit, listen, and understand the narratives of young people of color in Richmond, and really hear what they had to say in that moment, in that time and place, in that context, and really key in on the nuances that we needed to be mindful of. Another goal was to inform effective community interventions and create more empathetic and accurate assessment. And from the beginning, we were intentional and mindful that the stories that we heard and were going to hear didn't just fall on our ears. It needed to be the communities, and everyone in the community that directly impacted and worked with young people needed to hear what we heard. And young people agreed. They said, we want you to tell everyone about our stories and what we're going through. And so one of our goals is to see how we could use what we heard from the listening campaign to really inform how we look at trauma and adolescent development, and also how do we use youth voice to drive our strategies to inform our process and really create something that is transformational. I won't go over our methodology and our findings in detail, but we actually have our whole report printed out and some of our briefs located at this table over there. So if you're interested in learning more about our listening campaign, you can go grab one after the convening. Some of the emergent themes that came up that we found was that trauma is pervasive, assumed, multidimensional. It's organized through silencing and shaming, and experienced with adults as unempathetic, judgmental, and punitive. So one of the forms of violence that young people mention were the types of violence that aren't necessarily talked about, and we refer to this as the silent forms of violence. And that's really rooted in shame, embarrassment, and also hopelessness. And hopelessness shows up in a way where young people don't even see the point of talking to an adult about their problems because they're afraid that they might get other systems involved or that they may call the police, right? And so there's this ambivalence to really talk to adults that Laylee's research actually kind of digs deeper into, and I'll go over that in a little bit. But I wanted to share this quote that was really powerful. And so it says, "My experience with violence is very brutal. I grew up with violence as if it were my sibling." And so what this young person is saying really highlights the level of intimacy that young people have with violence, right? They're comparing violence to their siblings. So we have to understand that this is a relationship that's complex, it's intertwined, And it's even like familial, right? When I think of my relationship with my sibling, me and my sister don't get along, like we fight a lot, but at the end of the day, if someone takes my sister away from me, I'm gonna feel some type of way, right? And so in turn, when we think about taking the violence away, we have to make sure that we're also ensuring that multiple levels of support and healing are happening at the same time. Some of the primary coping strategies, the number one strategy that young people said that they utilize is drugs and alcohol, drugs particularly weed. This was a quote that Laylee found in her research. I feel like nobody would be able to understand except marijuana. It's the best stress reliever. When I don't have it, it's like World War III and a half. And through her quantitative research, she actually found out that young people find talking to an adult potentially more harmful than accessing weed, right? So they're actually saying that the adults are more traumatizing than drugs. And so what do youth want and need? So someone to listen and to care, and opportunities to lead and learn. So youth want change in their communities. And us as adults, we have to make sure that we prioritize that relationship and that partnership with young people for this to happen. As much as young people said, we don't trust adults, adults judge us, a lot of the young people we talked to also said, we also need adults. Right? So how do we start to prioritize and make sure that we're creating authentic relationships? And so we know we can't run the city, it's too complex, but our experience and our voices should count, especially because we're the most affected. And so what we found from the listening campaign is that trauma is multidimensional, it's complex, it's atmospheric, right? And so what we have to acknowledge is that what needs to happen is chronic atmospheric healing, right? So healing that happens on multiple levels. And what that looks like at RYSE is that we need to work across roles and systems, making sure that we're first and foremost accountable to our young people. Making racism and positional power central to the work. And so we like to say, if it's not racially just, then it's not trauma-informed. Avoiding simplistic moral frames, so we can't label a strategy good or bad, because the same person smoking weed could be the same person engaging in music, right? And so this kind of like simplistic thinking can lead to policies like zero tolerance policies, which doesn't necessarily address the root causes. And young people also said that we need to take care of our own issues before we support them. I'm just going to go really briefly and wrap up. This was Laylee's Youth Participatory Action Research project. She examined coping strategies of young people of color in Richmond. She learned about trauma-informed care. She utilized quantitative and qualitative methods. And some of the things that she found out was that young people found it more comfortable to talk to their own peers than adults. So what her and her co-intern did was implement a chat lounge as their action plan, where they facilitated a youth-led space where young people can talk about their issues, and it was actually our most successful program at our youth center. And what she learned is that a lot of policies are meant to focus on individual behavioral change, but we need to really look at the larger structural systemic issues. And some of our work on the horizon, we've done multiple YPARs, including understanding coping, the school to prison pipeline, LGBTQ climate, and right now we're working on a Listening to Heal campaign, which is kind of similar to the listening campaign, but now we're also talking to teachers, because as we know, service providers also experience their own levels of trauma and stress, and we want to know how that's related and how that impacts the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Awesome. Awesome. So if you're wondering whether or not active listening is important, active listening is important. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to bring up now Maven McGovern from Youth Radio. Maven, come on up.
How to in here. Oh, here we go. Sorry. I think so. Yeah. No, I just.
I think.
Oh no, I just want to go to the
Thank you. That's it.
That's it?
Yes.
You're good?
Yes, thank you. So I work at a media organization, but I'm the art person, so I'm always a little unsure about technology. So I work at Youth Radio in downtown Oakland. My name is Maven McGovern. I always tell people I have a really long title, so thank you. I always tell people I have a really long title, but it's a Director of the Arts Pathway and Integrated Learning. So I look at some of the creative expression programming there and also just our overall outcomes for young people around personal growth, professional development, and technical skills and training. Youth Radio is an award-winning media production company that trains diverse groups of young people in digital media and technology. Partnering with industry professionals, students learn to produce marketable media for massive audiences while bringing youth perspectives to issues of public concern. We're most well known for our NPR stories, but Youth Radio offers all different kinds of programming, all different kinds of media production, and we're currently in the process of really looking at expanding our audience base and investing more in some peer-to-peer interactions around our content. Our mission is to launch young people on career and education pathways by engaging them in work-based learning opportunities, creative expression, professional development, case management, and academic support services. So ultimately, Youth Radio is about equity, it's about tequity, it's about equity in the media and content, and about making sure that young people's voices are being elevated, are being heard, and that young people have an opportunity to participate in national conversations about issues that directly affect them. Youth Radio was started in the 90s when a journalist who was like an award-winning journalist noticed that there was a really big increase on the reporting on youth crime. And a lot of people have talked about this thing in the 90s where they were reporting on young people and gangs and all this stuff so much that people started to be like, oh my God, youth are out of control, and pass all these laws that we're still dealing with today that have had incredibly negative impacts. And at that time, youth crime was actually on the decline, but it was being so over-reported that people got the sense that young people were just spiraling out of control. And she kind of noticed, like, none of these stories, none of these reporters, no one's talking to any young people. Everyone who's telling these stories are not from these communities, and they're not from this age group. So she wanted to create the opportunity for young people to tell the stories of their communities on their own. And 20 years later, Youth Radio is still around, and it's really evolved. All young people at Youth Radio complete a 6-month media production training program, and then they're eligible for paid internships either at Youth Radio or with an employer partner. We have a training entry point for young people 14 to 18, and then an entry point for young people 18 to 24 that's a little bit different and is focused more on getting young people into apprenticeship programs and getting them certified, because young people who are coming to us around the 18 to 24 age range often need something a little bit more immediate as far as like financial stability and getting connected with living wage work opportunities. So we have all different kinds of internships at Youth Radio. There's journalism, mobile app development, or an HTML coding, graphic design, music production, studio engineering. We even pay people to do live DJ stuff, which is really cool. Our DJ instructor, his name is DJ Fuse. He was worked with Digital Underground when they were first starting, so I always tell the kids, like, he produced music with Tupac, like, he's it, and they're like, what? And then they'll, like, Google, he's, like, 50 now, but they Google his pictures, and they're like, is that you? Like, which is really cool, and it's very much within the Youth Radio model. The Youth Radio model is all about partnering the young person with the industry professional. Our journalists are all award-winning journalists. People are coming to us from, the different areas of the tech world are coming from Facebook or Google or Twitter. We make sure that young people are being connected with people who are at the top of their field. And I always say we don't do the youth version of things. This is not something where it's like kids doing a kid thing. This is young people doing industry standard work at a top quality level, around their own stories. Very proud of that. We also have culinary arts. We have a web radio program. Young people can get jobs peer teaching, so if they were really into the program and they want to teach the new group of students, we do everything as a cascading mentorship model. And then they can also do social media marketing and event promotion. And then a few projects that we have at Youth Radio that just really speak specifically to creating a safe space. We have Out Loud Radio, which is a project at Youth Radio that aims to support LGBTQ young people in creating positive community and opportunities to represent themselves in the media. They hold drop-in events, produce a monthly radio show, and support story and project development around the building. So if there's stuff coming up around LGBTQ issues, we make sure that young people in the Out Loud program are the ones who are kind of like doing that media. And you can check it out on the website if you want, if you're interested. And then we have a support services. So in addition to every young person who comes to our site gets a fresh, healthy meal that was cooked that day, they also are able to engage in case management, therapy through a partnership we have with UC Berkeley's Wright Institute that we're very grateful for, amazing, and then academic advising. And all of that is part of the programming there, because we had some experiences where young people were kind of like, well, I'm here and I'm doing all this media and I'm doing great. And I'm like, okay, but you haven't been to school in 6 months. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure that we have the benefit of getting young people without any of the context that they have in the school system. I don't know if you are somebody who spends most of school in the hallway or doesn't really come, because when you show up at Youth Radio, you're achieving at this very high level. But so sometimes that means we're not aware of the areas where they could be achieving more outside of our space. We have a creative expression program that came out of our health programming. It's called Remix Your Life. We do a mixtape project. The DJ classes are housed there. We have weekly studio sessions that the young people participate in. And then I also wanted to share Teach Youth Radio with you guys. It's a free resource for educators. There's just like a ton of curriculum on there. You can go on there and download the curriculum. The toolkits have everything you need in it, all the handouts, all the media, all the kind of like context, resources online. And then there's also a series of boot camps that we put on. So if anyone's interested in that, you can definitely go on the website or email me anytime, and I can keep put you on the email list so that you can get notified about any boot camps and stuff that's coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maven. Okay, so now we have two former students of Leadership High School, right? And so I want to bring up Shauna Serrano and Joseph Reagans to talk about H20 Productions.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Shauna Soriano, and Joseph and I are part of H20 Productions, which is located at Leadership High School in San Francisco. We specifically focus, we recently partnered with Center for Youth Wellness, which is located in the Bayview District in San Francisco, to each create our own research presentations, which we will briefly explain to you today. So my project was assessing resources to prevent and treat trauma and stress in San Francisco high schools. The purpose for my project was to identify the different resources in the different high schools in San Francisco, specifically resources related to preventing and treating trauma and stress that youth go through, and also to understand how wellness coordinators and staff themselves can identify whether students are experiencing trauma or stress. For our study setting, I decided to choose around 7 different high schools in San Francisco, specifically in different districts. I felt like it would give a better summary of high school students in San Francisco. I created 10 questions asking them about the different resources each school provides and the services at the Wellness Center. I also did online research using the San Francisco Unified School District website to look at demographics, school size, because San Francisco high schools, every school has from 1,000 to 100 students at each school, and I interviewed their wellness coordinators. And from these questions that I interviewed, I learned that all schools make an effort to communicate with their students experiencing stress and trauma, and at least try to connect them to some type of activity, whether it's inside or outside of school. Students cope with stress and trauma in very positive and negative ways. A positive way that wellness coordinators mentioned was academics. A negative way can be whether it happens in a fight or they're just not showing up to class. A lot of the staff specifically rely on the referral system, in which, if many are not familiar, the teacher, sees if their student is not doing well, writes it on a piece of paper, and gives it to the wellness coordinators. But also at some schools, not only staff can write for the students, but students can write for themselves or for another peer. Most schools have wellness centers. However, out of the 7, one school, Leadership High School, did not have a wellness center. Majority of the schools have basic and temporary support groups like women and guys empowerment groups. However, they're not really long-term. They're only there for a short amount of time, and then they eventually go away. And each school tries their best to reach out to as many students as they can, regardless of school size. However, smaller schools have a better advantage of being more communicative with their students. From my project, the 3 main points that I got out was that schools don't specifically have resources that prevent and treat trauma or stress, only how to cope, just like the different activities at each school. I learned very important that the student and teacher relationship is very crucial. I think that students and teachers should constantly be communicating in order to create a better learning and trusting environment. And finally, schools make sure every student knows about the Wellness Center and what services they provide, and to let them know that it's a key safe space at the school. And now Joseph will briefly explain his presentation.
Hi, my name is Joseph, as Shauna just said. So for my assessment, I did an assessment on resiliency factors among youth with ACEs. For those of you that don't know what ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. So a little background about my project. So what a resiliency factor is it's the something or the someone that gets these youth through these adversities on a daily basis. I found it important to understand what these resiliency factors are, because I feel like it's important to understand what it is that get these youth through these adversities on a daily basis. And once you understand what it is that gets these youth through these adversities, then you can figure out how to better understand youth and actually help them in the future. So a little timeline about how matter of fact, I don't have as much time, so I'm just going to get straight to it. Yeah. So I came up with a survey that consisted about like 15 or 10 questions. 69 people took the survey at Leadership High School. It consisted of 10th to 12th graders just because we were last year's seniors, so we had to keep up with the same kids that actually took the survey. So for the data collection process, we had the students take the survey online on a form site, and after further collecting data from the survey, this is what we found. So we found that students, before I even get to that, I had a slide on here that showed what the survey actually looked like, and it just had questions that asked like, what are these different types of adversities you experience on a daily basis and how you get through it. And some of the options were like parents or family or friends and stuff like that, just anything and they could put. So we found that 20% of students responded with family members to be a positive support system. 15% of students said friends, and 13% said self-motivation, 12% said teachers or other helpful resources. So students reported that family members were pretty much the highest reported resiliency factor that got them through these adversities on a daily basis. We found it also powerful that students were referring to their friends as a high resiliency factor too. So as you can see, this is a chart of all of the students' responses throughout the survey. And as you see, family member, friend, relationship, and self-motivation is at the top of that chart. So we gave the students a space to where they could actually post pictures or pictures of anything or videos of the things that get them through these adversities they experience. And here's a little something that shows like one of the students said, "My friends will be there for me no matter what." So their friends are what gets them through their adversities. It's a pick of my family because they helped me get through my life, or through life. So family is a big part of it. And this is actually a teacher at Leadership High School. One of the students posted on the survey and said she provides resources to help her students thrive. So with that being said, although these adversities that these youth are facing, like these kids are facing adversities on a daily basis, but what we're failing to understand is that the resiliency factors that are getting these youth through these adversities are actually being taken away from them at the same time. So like I said before, students reported that friends and family members were a big part of the resiliency factors that would get them through. And at the same time, I had a previous study that tried to understand these ACEs and these things that they're going through. And one of the most high reported was friends or peers being incarcerated, or family members being incarcerated or taken away by drug abuse and stuff like that. So I just found it kind of powerful that all these resources that are here for these kids to thrive and stay focused in school is also being stripped away from them. And with that being known, I feel that with this knowledge, like, we can come up with different resources for youth. Like, now that we know, like, okay, you say you need this to get through these adversities, your friends or peers, or maybe you want more community programs that will help you get through these adversities. Maybe we can come up with more of these resources for the youth to have in order for them to stay positive in school, stay positive in life, and actually have a motivational force and have like a backbone in some sort of way, something to fall back on to help them support and thrive in life. And with this project, we both had funders from the Zellerback Foundation, Family Foundation, so we want to give a big shout out to them. Also members of the CYW, Center for Youth Wellness, we participated with them at the same time. So a big shout out to Catherine Harrison, Tiffany Johnson, who is a part of the H20 production, and Sook Perel and Belle Silbergale, who is a principal of the high school, who allowed us to do the survey. So I says questions, but as you guys know, I just want to say one more thing. So the whole point of what the H20 production does is just we want to understand these different systems of oppression and expose it and actually inform people that haven't been informed and figure out these different ways to expose and break down these systems of oppression. So thank you for having me today, and much respect to everybody.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to bring everyone up, and I'm going to ask them a few questions that are kind of on my mind, and then I would love for you to ask questions as well. And as they're coming to the stage, I'm going to put them all on the spot in the most loving way possible. I did warn most of them that I would go there, but I firmly believe that if you want to help people move through trauma, you actually need to invest in moving through your own trauma. And so I'm going to ask them how they actively engage in their own self-care. So are we going to move that mic right? So if you all could speak to that, how do you actively engage in your own self-care when there's a traumatic event or when you're going through stress? What is it that you do?
Not all at once.
Sorry, I'll get out of your way in a second.
No adults left.
You want to get the other one?
Well, I think self-care is really hard, and I think that for me, it's something that I try to hold when I'm talking to my young people about their own self-care, you know, that I know how hard it is for me, and I'm 32 and not in school, and you know what I mean, not living in my family home, and I have a lot more autonomy than a teenager does, and I still struggle sometimes to work it in. But I think for me, trying to really spend time with my friends, do things where I'm around in a setting where I can just kind of like be and and don't have to be on, really helps. Hiking, yoga, exercise, all those kinds of things. I think one of the biggest things I've learned over time is that when you're sitting with people who are dealing with a lot of trauma, and this is important to remember for our young people, right? Because they say 74% of young people growing up in urban communities experience PTSD like symptoms. So that's 3 out of 4. So the 4th kid is around people who are severely traumatized all the time. If they don't have their own PTSD-related trauma, they're dealing with vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue or something like that, And it's that you actually start to physically take on some of that stuff. And so remembering that trauma is stored in your body and figuring out how to kind of like physically work it out can be really, really important. And then I always have a plug about organic meat and dairy, because animals produce the same stress hormones that we do. And so when we eat, and if you can't afford that, eating halal or eating kosher can be just as good, because the animals are killed in a way that doesn't cause their systems to flood with stress hormones. And so I think that little stuff like that can be really helpful.
So for me, how I engage in self-care, I personally find it really hard to kind of talk about my emotions and kind of describe how I'm feeling. So what I do is I utilize music. I play the piano, and I find that how I kind of metabolize my trauma and stress is non-verbally through music. And if folks are able to kind of like connect with it, then that's like, that's for me, like they're connecting with how I'm feeling. And so that's why I feel like it's really important to also offer some different strategies to youth, aside from maybe like writing or engaging in dialogue, for young people to really express how they're feeling in different ways.
For me would be, well, honestly, I meditate every day. I wake up, and honestly, the first thing I think of that comes to mind is like all the things I have to do. For me, I just wake up, open the blinds to let some light in, and just kind of talk through what I need to get through the day. And I just kind of tell myself that I'm gonna get through it in the end. And I think I just honestly take it one day at a time. And if the day is more stressful than other days, I just meditate throughout the day. And I see that it really helps me just take one day at a time, one situation at a time.
I don't know, that's kind of hard to answer. I mean, kind of like Shauna, like take it day by day, but I see it as like when you know there's like, when there's different things in society that's meant to hold you down, it's kind of hard to think of like to uplift yourself. But me personally, I've tried lots of things. Like I've talked to family members, I talked to friends, and I have a lot of close friends. So I talk to them a lot, just let them know the things that's going on. Just have somebody to cope with, to talk to. I feel like that helps with staying in a positive mentality. But it's hard to say, because how long will that last for you to stay happy? Like I have friends to talk to, I have family, I have other resources, I have advisors, but I feel like none of that truly really makes me internally like feel great about myself, just because I know there are many different systems of oppression out there, and I know we talk about it so much, but it is what it is, and this is real. Like, I feel like once you know what's out there, like when you really understand society, like it just changes your whole perspective and how you think about yourself and others. And I just feel like once you're put on game, once you're knowledgeable of the things around you and the people around you, then you start to realize a lot of things. And that's all I can really say about it. And for myself, just talk to people, experience new things. Traveling helps a lot too, because you see a lot about the world, so yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot like that. But I think it's really important. I completely believe that there will be no transformation out there unless there's transformation in here, with all of us, myself included, continually. So thank you so much. So I've got some great questions. I think I'm going to go to these questions. This person works with youth in Hayward, San Lorenzo, Union City area. So what resources would you recommend for a youth living in those areas?
Do you guys want to start?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
So what resources would you recommend for youth that live in the areas of Hayward, San Lorenzo, Union City?
Okay. Maybe more community-based programs, more things that they could turn to for help, resources, something that they can use to benefit them. So I'd say more like community-based programs and stuff like that.
I would say like a youth, or I guess something that's also in the curriculum of the school, I think, where, I don't know, maybe a time out of the day where they can talk about the stress and trauma that they go through. I don't know, just some type of space that is in school that just gives them the opportunity to not just talk about what they're learning, but actually deal with, what's going on outside of school.
I would recommend holding maybe listening sessions with young people, kind of going back to the origins of RYSE. Like RYSE youth really came together with adult partners and developed a community survey. And through that survey was where they identified that the top priority of services they wanted to receive were mental health services. So I think holding maybe like focus groups and listening sessions and really getting some of the information from the young people and some of the ideas and dreams that they have for the community.
And then there's a great program out there called the Reach Center. It's like, I think it's in San Lorenzo or Ashland, Cherryland area, but it's definitely in that area. It's an amazing, amazing place. It was like a multi-million-dollar investment by Alameda County because they realized that the outcomes, the health disparity issues were so prevalent in that particular community. Ashland, Cherryland is like an unincorporated area between Hayward and San Leandro, I think. They have everything, therapy, media production, job training, like you name it, they have it happening at the Reach Center. I really recommend them. And there's also Youth Uprising, which is in East Oakland. They are a neighborhood-based program, so they primarily serve young people living in Deep East Oakland between it's like 73rd to, the San Leandro border, and then like MacArthur to East 14th. But anyone who wants to go to their center is welcome. Young people 14 to 24, they can always come to Youth Radio. We'd be happy to see them. And then there's a great program too called Bay Area Youth Centers, I think, and they have some different stuff in the Hayward area, and one of their really amazing programs is called RYSE, which is like a drop-in based programming for LGBTQ youth that is run by this woman who's just phenomenal. So I really recommend all of those places.
Great, thank you. Lots of great questions. I hope we can get to most of them. So if friends and family are most important resources, many of you mentioned that, what about those who don't have a lot of friends or family that they can, how do you support them?
Well, something I didn't necessarily get to in my presentation, I feel like I didn't mention that a lot of other students did report that not only just friends and family, but it's other things like music, art, nature, and a lot of other things. So I feel like just like having the thought of like a community behind you, it just feels like you have a support system. So I feel like some type of community program, or like Shauna said earlier, like a space where these kids can actually talk to people and express what's really on their minds, like what's really going on. And once there's a space where you could do that, then there's no telling what could happen after. So I feel you need to have a space where these kids can talk to people regardless if they're friends or family. They could be it has to be someone or something, like they have to talk to somebody to express what's on their mind. So it could be a relief factor.
Well, in my presentation, I kind of talked about how the school, specifically staff, I don't know, I feel like they all hold a responsibility to talk to their students when there isn't family or friends there. I just think that teachers and staff should be communicative with all their students when they don't have family or friends to go to.
At RYSE, we really prioritize in building relationships with young people, and we kind of understand that like programs kind of come and go and they change, but if the relationship isn't there, then it doesn't even matter what kind of programs we have. And so we're really intentional about like what we say, leading with love, and so really creating a RYSE community, a RYSE family within our center. And really engaging young people in partnership and involving them in every aspect of some of our key decision-making process. For our staff hiring, for example, a staff member has to go through a youth interview, which is probably the hardest interview I've ever had to do, because youth are really honest. If they don't like you, if there's something that you said that rubs them the wrong way, like we need to listen to that, and we really need to have folks represented in our center that young people feel like they can connect to, that they can relate to, that also understand some of the struggles that they're going through.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything that's been said. I feel like that is where programs come in creating those spaces for young people. I also feel that if you can have a program that has some sort of skill or interest element to it, young people will connect over that. Many of the young people who come to youth radio, some of them are very popular in school, some of them have no friends. And some of them have very difficult home situations, and they're at youth radio every day. You know what I'm saying? They're there as soon as they get out of school, and we're kicking them out of the building gently and lovingly at the end of the night every night. You know what I mean? But they have a space at youth radio because they have a skill. They produce music, or they do graphic design, and other young people who do what they do or who are interested in it. Oh, I'm a rapper. There's one young person who stands out to me who's on the autism spectrum. He's like a musical genius, you know, like music is his language. He speaks music. And so he's at youth radio, he's like coveted because he makes these amazing beats that every single kid who does music is like, if I could just get my hands, if he could just give me a beat, I know I could be famous. I know I could blow up, you know. And so I feel like when I've talked to him, he doesn't have that many friends at school, but everyone at youth radio knows who he is, you know. So when we can give young people this opportunity to be seen for what they're really good at, it's easier for them to connect with each other and build those safe spaces. And someone had told me once that two of the most significant factors in mitigating the long-lasting effects of trauma in a young person are mastery and a caring, consistent adult. So if we can help a young person gain a skill, it's not just about the jobs that they can get later or the fact that they can do things. It's also about the fact that you've expanded their identity past the things that have happened to them, past their experiences, past what they come from, and into what they can do, which can be very important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love these questions. So to the general public, if there's one misconception to correct or takeaway point from your work that you want everyone to know, what would that be? Who wants to take that on first?
Keep looking at our youth panelists. I feel like your voice is the most important.
I guess I'll go first. I don't know. So, what is the big message I want to give you guys? Or misconception. I just feel like everybody's voice matters. I feel like everybody's voice is important, and people's thoughts, the people's lives as well too. I feel like a big takeaway that you guys should all have from me and her presentation, and everybody's, just pay attention to the people around you and understand that everybody has a life story. Everybody has a different story, a different thing that they go through, and not everybody is the same. But I feel like people just need to listen to others and understand where people come from as a whole. And once you do that, I feel like people can click more, people can understand others more, and we can get things done more in society and with ourselves. So just listen to each other and understand others before judging.
Well, for me and Joseph, I think the biggest thing is just, I guess, whatever work you guys each do, whether it's working with kids or working in schools, for us is just to listen to the youth. I think that's the most important coming out of both of our research projects. It's just listening to the youth and just simply being there for them can make all the difference.
I think at RYSE, something that we really believe is that like we fight against policies that are aimed at changing the individual, that places blame on young people, and kind of what Dr. Duncan Andrade said, young people's reactions are just normal responses, right? And that the environment and kind of the structures that they're a part of are the ones that are traumatizing and that they're abnormal and unnatural, right? And so we need to think larger and start creating more systems change rather than focusing on individual behavioral change.
When I hear that question, I think of specific young people who I've worked with who I feel like were emblematic of the kind of misperceptions that exist around young people who are negotiating a lot of trauma. And in trying to capture that in a headline, I think I would try to say that I think the biggest misperception is that there's something wrong with the kid, like you guys were saying, because we talk about PTSD, we talk about this idea that they have like a disorder, you know what I mean? But first of all, we all know like there's no post for many of our young people, so PTSD isn't even an accurate diagnosis. And when I've had kids tell me that they think that they're crazy or they feel like they're not smart or all of these things, and then you dig under it just a little bit, like I had a young person who started at youth radio when he was 14. He couldn't spell his name, he didn't know his address, his alphabet, his days of the week, like just he'd spent his whole career in the hallway. No one had ever sat down with him and taught him these things, and people were like, oh, well, he's illiterate and he's this, and I'm like, no, actually, like he can do all of that stuff, you know what I mean? He just needs a little help with it. Like I sat with him and he learned his alphabet in 2 hours. How long did it take you to learn your alphabet? You know what I mean? Or your days of the week. And young people who have said like, well, I can't control my reactions, or sometimes I do things and I don't understand why it happened. And it's like, when I look at everything that's happened in your life, if you were functioning fine and everything was just like sunshine and roses, that's what would worry me. That's what would make me feel like something was off, you know what I mean? But everything you've come through in your life to be where you are, like there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with the world around you. You've developed these ways of taking care of yourself within it. You're amazing. And so I think if we could just shift this idea, stop coming to young people and asking them to like open up about all the heavy negative stuff that they're carrying, and just start to focus on the amazing strength and resilience and intelligence that they demonstrate every day in getting up and trying to do it all again, that we could really shift the experience that they have.
That's great. Thank you. What you're saying has me thinking about a conversation I had with my mom, who would continually say to my niece, "What's wrong with you?" She'd do something silly, and I'm like, "No, ask her what made you do that, not what's wrong with you," right? And it was really hard for people to see how we start that process at a very, very young age. And now it's time for us to really detox that in our own minds and in our own speech as well. So thank you for sharing that.
I love what you're saying too, not to go on, but just that because it's such a small shift.
Yep.
It's a few words
Tiny.
different. Why did you do that? What were you thinking about when you made that choice versus what is wrong with you? That changes everything. So it's also that it's simple to make the change.
Right. Something we can do right now. And all of these systems that we're working within that are toxic are created by people. Right? So we need to work with the people that are creating these systems, right? Okay, so great question. What do you see as the relationship between peer and family support systems and counseling services offered in schools? What do you see as the relationship between peer and family support systems, like what you're doing, and counseling services that are offered in schools? Yeah, we're not giving you anything easy today. But we want to grow neural networks, right? We just saw that presentation earlier. Let's grow them.
Can I help reframe that? Just thinking
Sure.
of Shauna's
Yeah.
presentation, and my thought would be, what would you do with the data that you just, what's your next step? I think would get to that question maybe. With the information that specifically the pair of you gathered,
Right.
how would you use that?
I think, well, with the data that I all collected, I don't know, it just kind of ties back into the staff and teachers' responsibility. I don't know, I just feel like every teacher and staff or anyone that works with kids kind of has this responsibility to go up to their kids or like, actually genuinely care about their kids, about like, I don't know, it's just, I don't know, just when I don't know, in school, it was just like teachers were just always on a surface level. They didn't, they're just like, did you turn in the homework? Not, how are you doing? And then they'd be mad if you didn't turn in the homework, but it's like, you're going through different things that make you not turn in the homework. I don't know, it's just a matter of like teachers and staff understanding their students, and I just feel like that will make students more motivated to go to school, more feel like they can, trust and actually genuinely learn in school rather than just, trying to get through it and turn everything in. I don't know.
I think, Joseph, you actually spoke to that as well, just talking about the difference between transaction and transformation, right? We, a lot of times are, check, next, and we deal in a very transactional way with people, and you're speaking to look around you, see who's around you, right? And be more transformative in that process. Did you want to add?
So basically like next steps to, okay, so from my point of view, I feel like just doing the work that we're doing is already creating some type of change. I was watching a Tupac interview not too long ago, and in the interview he said, I may not change the world, but I sure will spark the brain that can change the world. I don't know if you all had, okay, yeah, some of you guys know about it. So yeah, I found that kind of powerful, and I feel like that kind of pertains to us on this panel right now. Like, we may not change the world right now, but we sure are gonna like keep doing the work we're doing. We're gonna keep coming up with field notes, like going out there actually exposing these systems of oppression and understanding new ones that we don't understand now. And I feel like once we continue to do that, other people will catch on eventually and understand that there's something wrong and something needs to change. So we may not change the world today like Tupac said, but we will spark the brain. So.
I think that that relationship is really important in terms of like schools and counselors and families, and I think that there are still opportunities to strengthen that relationship by including some amazing like community-based organizations. I think schools can benefit from like allowing more community-based organizations to provide services to students. And not have to jump through like loops and bounds of like district of requirements to kind of just provide like a simple service of a support group on campus through like a health center. And so I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities to strengthen and to involve the community in that relationship, and also involve parents more as well.
I think that's like really true, everything that's been said, and I think sometimes service providers, we forget the level of trauma and often unresolved trauma that our students' parents are dealing with, and I think that sometimes that places a strain on the relationship because sometimes the service provider gets so caught up in all the factors that are all the challenges that the young person is experiencing in the home, and they become very judgmental of the parent, and that relationship becomes something where it's like you're stepping in between a young person and their parent instead of providing a support, or the assumption that just because a parent There was that study that came out a while ago, many years ago, about how kids who have family dinner with every night with their parents are, less likely to drop out of school, more likely to go to college, less likely to use drugs, like all of these things. And it's like, a kid who has two parents who can be home for dinner at 6 o'clock has a lot more going for them than family dinner. You know what I mean? And these ways that, we make low-income parents feel responsible for the factors when it's like, yeah, I work 3 jobs to put food on the table, or maybe they're engaged in the street economy because that's the best way to feed their kids. And when we feel that we are in a space to judge them or evaluate that from a space of judgment, I think that puts a lot of strain on the relationship and puts the young person in an uncomfortable position. So being able to value the parents who, even if they're struggling with addiction or struggling with different things, create a safe space for their kids, show up for them, come to things, and engage with them can be really, really important for the relationship that providers have with their clients also, in addition to making it clear to the family that you're balancing that line of looking out for the young person, but you're not just going to be calling CPS every time something is a little bit in the gray. I know that's kind of like a controversial thing to say, but it's just sort of like my opinion, speaking out of my experience.
Yeah, keep it real. So what about the role of creativity? What is the role of creativity in youth-centered stress trauma healing programs?
Well, I think creativity is huge. That's like what I studied in school, was sort of like trauma recovery through art. I've found that a lot of young people are not necessarily ready to engage in therapy straight off the bat, or that when they don't have a post in their PTSD, that sometimes talk therapy isn't the most helpful thing. Like, great, first of all, I think we all know that the kinds of therapy which is why the Wright Institute here is like amazing, because they provide a year of free therapy, not 10 sessions, you know what I mean? And every week for a year. That's an incredible thing, and it's very hard to find. So I think you're oftentimes creating a situation where the young person, some people who've been in therapy know it could take 3 or 4 years with your therapist before you really get to anything. So even the year may be something where the young person has just started to get to the root of the issue when it's time for you to close out working with them. So it's important to be aware that it's an imperfect sort of like situation. And so sometimes creative expression is an easier way for the young person to process what they're going through. I have one young person who comes to mind in particular where it was really hard for him to verbalize his emotions. He had serious chronic trauma, and we were sitting one day having a conversation because he was saying that he hadn't been able to sleep for like over a week, and he couldn't eat, and he was just struggling, and we were trying to talk about it. Well, what do you think is going on? And I don't know, but he was drawing the whole time we were talking, and at the end he had drawn a picture of this heart, beautiful picture, that had 3 bullet holes in it, and his friend had just been shot 3 times and killed recently, and then he wrote like "stay strong" next to it, and it's like, you think maybe this is about so-and-so, and maybe that's some of what, and he's like, I don't know, but it's interesting to see how sometimes young people can access those emotions and it feels safer for them. So, and it also, creative expression does facilitate that sense of mastery. So I think it's like really important personally.
So creativity is one of RYSE's core values. We find it that creativity is a key ingredient to being able to vision the type of communities that we want to be living in. And at RYSE, we operate in an integrative model, and so and an all right doors model. So no matter how a young person is coming in, we accept them for how they come in and what they carry. And a young person may come into our center trying to access education and career support, but then we find out that they have a really big interest in music, and so we have a media art and culture program where young people are able to create beats, create murals, engage in theater and performing arts, and so we are able to make that connection, and that we don't operate in silos, but we make sure that all of our services are available to the young person that walks in through the door.
Well, from my presentation and my project, a lot of the teachers kind of, like, even though there's not actual like activities at the school, the teachers kind of just open up their rooms. Like there's specifically one school that a teacher kind of just opens, she's an art teacher and she kind of just opens her room for people to just, you know, doodle or like do art. Or at Leadership High School, they had like a studio in which once a week kids could go and, you know, play with music and make music. But yeah, I think that creativity, is very important.
Same as Shauna. We went to the same school, so I think creativity is very important too. Like she said, at Leadership High School, like we had a lot of space where we could just be ourselves. We could pretty much every teacher there was cool and knew every student there, and it's like a school of how many? Like 300 students. So yeah, they knew all of us, and we were all cool, like best friends or something like that. So we would just be in their classrooms. We had a space where we could just chill, do homework, talk to friends. We could still stay after school to play sports or whatever, you know. Like it was open to us, like for a long time after school. And I just feel like when you have that space to be yourself and be creative, do the things that you actually like to do, and that just makes you happy, I feel like it's very important. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. You know, Maven, what you said had me thinking about some feedback that we got when we, you know, it's very interesting. It takes a long time for people to work through processes. And oftentimes youth will say, yeah, you come in with your program, you do your little thing, and then you bounce, right? And so for that reason, it takes them much longer to open up. It's not just the process itself, it's that they don't trust that we're going to be there for them for the long haul. And so thank you for bringing that point up. It's really important. Okay, another fine question for you to meditate on. How do adults, healthcare providers, and others destigmatize obtaining mental health services, right? Mental health care for teens? Deep breath in and out. So how do we destigmatize? You know, when people think about mental health, they think, oh, I'm not crazy, right? And so how do we make that more accessible for teens so that they are, how do we create a safe space for them to say, you know what, I don't feel okay?
Where they're not just actually saying I'm crazy.
Exactly. How do we do that, make it more accessible?
I feel like we've talked about it a lot already today, but I just feel like just having the space, like I'm gonna say it again, the space to talk to somebody and actually have, like others have said earlier, like have somebody to connect with or someone that you can relate to. I feel like that eases your mind and lets you, it reassures you that like you're not crazy. Like there's things that happen in your life that makes you feel certain ways, it makes you act certain ways, but it doesn't define who you are. So I feel like, just like many of us have said earlier, I feel like you need a space to talk to somebody, to connect and actually express what is going on and what's on your mind, to further understand that you're not crazy and that there's something that's happening outside or around you that's making you feel this way.
I think, I don't know, just kind of the same thing. It's just we're in school. I feel like school shouldn't be just like, it shouldn't be just a stressor, but it should also be like a therapy session as well, just in school. Just kind of a space where kids, you know, out of their day can spend like 10, 15 minutes, you know, in a circle and just talk about what they're going through every single day. I feel like helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think first we also have to understand that in certain cultures and communities, the topic of mental health is really taboo and it's really ingrained in a lot of historical trauma. And so being able to recognize that first and foremost is a way, as a starting point. And also just tying in the last question, we also have to be creative as service providers, right? So also the way we frame some of our services and how we talk about some of our services. So for example, we don't call it anger management. We call it like, get your angries out, right? So being really creative with some of our titles, and also just reassessing and reevaluating some of the language we're using and talking to our young people. There was a moment in RYSE where there was like this idea of like checking in. Like if a adult was saying like, oh, can we check in? Like a young person knew that it was gonna be some sort of like circle or some sort of whatever. And then they would just be using that language like, oh, so-and-so, you need to check in with so-and-so, like they need to check in. And so then we had, as a staff, had to be intentional. It's like, oh, so this is how check-ins are being utilized and being framed. And so how can we change up the language around that? And how can we talk to our young people that check-in is not necessarily bad, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, I think like there's kind of like two different angles. One is Remix Your Life was actually born out of, I don't want to call it a failed, but a struggling support group where the case management team really felt like it would be great if we had gender-specific support groups for the young people. And everyone was like, yeah, that would be great. And then they put out all these flyers like, come to the gender-specific support group. And we're like, no one's coming. And it was like, yeah, you know, youth radio is not a mental health-based program, so young people are not going to self-select into something called a support group. It's just not happening. But if we make it a program where sometimes there's, you know, breakouts around that are gender specific, and we're making it about production and making it about something that's cool. We have this great studio, and young people for a long time have been like, why can't we record our own music in there? So I teamed up with one of the case managers, and we came up with this idea of a project called Remix Your Life that had 3 different days, a discussion group, a writing group, and then a studio day. And so young people are coming for the mixtape. You know, they're coming for the studio, they're coming for the writing, they come to the discussion group because they want to inform what the other young people are creating on, and you're able to sort of create this safe space for them to talk about the stuff that's going on. You're able to create different kinds of ways for them to process what's happening, and then through that space you can build the relationship and start referring to more traditional therapeutic services, if that makes sense. And then in the way that I frame the therapy stuff with young people, to be honest, is sometimes around money. I'm like, at a certain point in your life, it's going to cost this much. People go. All kinds of people go. If I could get free therapy every week, I would go. You know what I mean? And it kind of like changes it. And I also frame it just around health. You go to the gym for your body. You eat healthy for your body. Maybe you study. You try to sleep. This is like going to the gym for your mind. And it's something that everybody does. And then I also think that it's sort of a weird thing because mostly reality TV is super damaging, but in a lot of these shows, you see people go to therapy. And I think that seeing the way that that's kind of like normalizing it a little bit is having like somewhat of an impact on young people as well.
Yeah, that's great. Creativity and stealth, right? Got to be stealth. Totally. I never call my presentations, get your stuff together and do Qigong. I call it transformational leadership from the inside out, and then I can teach it to business people. But what they're going to get is, get your stuff together, and we're going to do some Qigong. So anyway, this person works with youth in Marin County, which you know is a very affluent area. And so how would you suggest they help equip the people that work with youth there to deal with issues like race and racism in Marin, right? When they may not be able to make the connection in their mind. Right?
There's a great documentary that was put out that was actually based in Marin and San Francisco. They compared 2 high schools. It's about affirmative action. So they compared 2 high schools, one, I forget where, but in sort of like, it was like, you know, San Francisco, not as it is now, but as it was like 15 years ago. And so it was like a urban high school that was really under-resourced, and then Marin Academy, which is like a fairly affluent school. And they just showed the students like the differences and the discrepancies is what they had around support stuff. And it was really interesting because you saw the students from Marin Academy at first were very much like, no, I don't believe in affirmative action. Like, I'm opposed, because, like, why should somebody else be getting extra support and getting into school? And then when they learned about everything that they had versus, students who were finding out the SAT was a thing the day of the SAT or the day before and signing up to take it, where they'd had a college counselor who'd been working with them weekly since 9th grade, the young people were like, that's fair. You know what I mean? And then they were like, and this is unreasonable. And you could see the kids at Marin Academy actually get really like fired up on this topic and really be able to own their privilege. And I think that young people are practical, so when we engage with young people in a space, I think that stories are a lot more compelling than statistics, and when we're able to connect young people with a reality and able to connect them with stories about stuff, I think that it creates a space where you're kind of talking about what does it mean to own your privilege? How do you use privilege in a way that benefits others? Privilege is dangerous when it's unowned and when people don't recognize it. So having privilege isn't necessarily something that is bad, It's about learning how to leverage it for others. And I think that those kind of conversations can be had really effectively through media, through films, through, going to see plays, and other kinds of things like that.
A resource that I can offer is that RYSE holds a trauma healing learning series where there are numerous providers and experts that kind of share their expertise to a group of folks. And so we'll be having some more sessions, some upcoming sessions. We talk about how we can look at trauma and healing within our communities. We also have done Erasing ACEs convening, where we look at the ACEs study through a racial justice lens, and really how we can center racial justice, race and racism within public health. So if you're interested in any of those resources, you can contact me, or we have resources where you can contact us as well.
I think it's just learn. I don't know. I just think they should learn about the privilege that they have, and I think how they can use it to help others, or if they can, I don't know. I just think exposing them to different people, different communities that they never been in. I don't know. Just kind of making them woke, if that makes sense. Just making them woke by exposing them to different things.
I agree with everybody on here. I feel like once you understand your privilege, that plays a big role in everything. But to understand your privilege, I feel like everybody needs to learn their history and understand their history. I feel like once you know your history and understand history as a whole, not just yours and others, I feel like that opens many gateways and doors to understanding society and privilege or non-privilege, everything. I feel like once you need to learn your history. History plays a big role in a lot of everything that goes on in our society. So,
Yeah, and history, right? Everyone's history. Yeah, so are we good? Okay. All righty. Can we do one more question or no? I thought we had till 3:30. No? Are we good? Okay. All right. Because got to get it out. So, Maven, can you explain what you mean when you say mastery? I think it's important that we...
Yes, sorry. Mastery is like mastering a skill. So it means like efficacy, knowing how to do something would be probably the way that I would say it. They say there's something out there that says it takes 1,000 hours of practice to be a master at something. So I frame that with the young people too, where I'm like, okay, so you come here like this many times a week, you do this for this many hours. If we keep it up, like at some point you'll be a master of that. But mastery is just having a skill, knowing how to do something.
Yeah, I think I would probably add to that being able to have a beginner's mind and being able to apply that to new and novel situations. So I know how to do this, but when something new comes up, I can apply that skill. Yeah. Okay, so how do you know when a student needs more than peer support when you're working with them, right? When you kind of have to bridge that gap between that and therapy. That was everyone. So how do you know, like when you're working with the students, how do you know when they need more than just peer support, where you might have to do some other type of intervention or a deeper level of therapy?
I feel like I have a response for that. I feel like it all connects back to you can't necessarily know it. Like you can't look at the kid and be like, oh, there's something more deep, there's something more going on to this kid that's wrong. I feel like it all connects back to like we were talking about earlier, actually speaking and understanding, like talking to the youth. When you talk to the youth, you know what, you get a sense of what's going on or what's happening in their mind or in life. And if they open up to you that much, then that's a gift. But I feel like just doing the work that we're doing, like, for instance, my survey basically I did 2 surveys actually for my previous study and now. And it basically gave me an understanding of what goes on in youth's life and what is it that holds them back, that hinders them or helps them prosper to greater or worse things, you know? So I think that you just need to, it has to be something that lets these youth know that it's a space where you can talk to me and you can let me know what's going on, or something that, yeah, I'm not even gonna say more about it, but I think that's the thing. You have to know what it is, or create a space that's gonna let these youth actually express themselves to you, and let you know what it is that's actually happening. So.
I think I don't know, I guess with youth, it's just being there, I think is very important. Just your presence, whether you're like a staff or a teacher, is just kind of being there, and just like, you don't have to obviously like ask them a million questions of what's going on with them, but just being there and letting them know that, you know, you support them and that, you know, you guys are both in this together, I think is really important. Just that support.
Yeah, like if you're able to develop a real authentic relationship, the young people will open up. If we have a lot of young people who just kind of burst through the doors after school and knows like what staff member they're looking for, like, oh, where's Andrew or where's Destiny? And when they find them, like, oh, we need to check in, you know, and they're the ones saying that, you know, they need to check in. But also just like as a staff, like we need to be keen to some of the changes that are happening with our young people. Every week we have a case review, which is like a cohort of staff members from each department that kind of come together and talk about some of the member concerns and issues and some of the things that they're noticing. And we develop a plan together to figure out how we can best support the young person. And that information kind of gets delivered to other staff members, whether there's a plan that's in place, so that the staff knows like, oh, this person, like to watch out for this person and to know like when to be able to support them.
Yeah, I think it's like a complicated question, like everyone said here, for a number of reasons. One, because I would say most young people need more than just peer support. I think the young person that doesn't need support, no matter how well resourced or what they're coming from, is a very rare young person. But do they want the support? Do they want it from you? Do they want it from the people who you have there? Maybe, maybe not, you know. Are they open to it? So I think that, you know, need and being able to provide it sometimes are not always cohesive, and it's good to like be aware of that and just keep trying to build the relationship so that you can at least know if something happens that's incredibly disruptive and try to account for it. And I think that there's like little things that cause me to pay more attention to stuff like that. I think young people who have a strong peer support network, you know, versus young people who really have trouble making friends and have trouble connecting with young people their age. Young people who always seem to be wearing a lot of clothes, like no matter what the weather is, they always have on tons of layers, kind of like in their hood, in the headphones. Young people who always sit by the door, with their stuff on, like they're ready to just run out of the room at any moment. Young people who are hyper vigilant, young people who dissociate. I think these things like raise red flags definitely around the fact that they may be experiencing some kind of chronic trauma in a way that's interfering with their ability to function on a daily basis. And so those kind of things like raise red flags, but they're definitely not the only indicators, because some young people will show up and you're like, oh, this kid is like, everything's going great, and then somebody else in the space may know how much of a struggle it is for them to be showing up like that. So conversation, I think, is the best way in long-term relationships.
Yeah, look people in the eye and be real with them, right? And spend time with them. That's cheap, right? That doesn't cost a lot of money. So thank you so much. We actually ended 1 minute early. I just want to let y'all know. I want to thank the representatives from RYSE, Youth Radio, and H20 Productions. And I have to say this last thing because I can't help it. I'm a practitioner. Sitting is the new smoking. So I'd love it if you stood up and took a quick stretch. Thank you so much.